In this lecture, we are going to look at how DAX operates. So we have already discussed this, that DAX sits in between the client and your DynamoDB table, and DAX is only meant for item level operations. Table level operations still go through to DynamoDB, so they will not be processed by the DAX cache. By table level operations, I mean creating, dropping a table and things like that. And when you make write requests, these write requests use something called as write through approach. What that means is whenever you write any data to your table, it will first be written to DynamoDB and then it will be updated in DAX. And write operation is considered successful if and only if both the writes are successful. And there is another approach called as write around approach, where you can bypass DAX and directly write to your DynamoDB table. And this kind of approach, write around approach, is sometimes useful when you want to write a large amount of data in short amount of time and you really don't care if it's not updated in the DAX cache. So in this case, of course, the item cache of the DAX cluster is going to go out of sync. So now let's understand how DAX functions when you make your read operations. Now, when you make a read request and DAX has the data you requested, then it's called as a cache hit, and the data will simply be returned from the DAX cluster and there won't be any request going through to the DynamoDB table. On the other hand, if DAX doesn't have the data, which we call as a cache miss, then it will be returned from DynamoDB and it will also be updated in DAX on the master node. So this is how a cache miss works. And important thing to remember here is if you make a strongly consistent read, then that request will be served directly from DynamoDB, and strongly consistent read request will not update the DAX cluster. This is important to note here, that the DAX cluster does not get updated when you make a strongly consistent read request. All right. Elasticache is another caching service, another in-memory caching service, and later in this course we are going to dive deeper into Elasticache. But here I'm just going to compare DAX versus Elasticache when we are using it with DynamoDB. So we have a client which is accessing DynamoDB through the DAX cache. So generally with DynamoDB, DAX is the better choice than using Elasticache. So we use DAX to cache individual objects or the results of query or scan operations. But if we are processing some aggregation results, for example, your application is compiling some aggregation results using the DynamoDB data, then that data cannot be returned to DAX. Now, DAX can only store data that is returned from DynamoDB table in response to the DynamoDB API requests. So if you have any other data like the aggregation results, for example, you can use the cache like Elasticache to store the aggregation results. All right, that's about it. Let's continue to the next lecture.